Hello there. We've really got to stop meeting like this. It is I, your Irish champion of the arena, as well as the battlefield. The last time we spoke, we were taking over portions of Great Britain, and the King of France even granted me rule over Wales. Oh, and I got married to the love of my life. So that was pretty cool. However, she is the wife of a great warrior, and thus she needs some proper apparel, as you can see. Now that's a woman there. For our honeymoon, I decided to take her back home to my humble abode in Pembroke, where we would end up having some nice meals, and we would enjoy our favorite pastime of hunting down bandits who were bothering the fine Welsh folks of these lands. Ah, we'll never forget these days together. And I must say that our honeymoon must have been going quite well because, well, my wife is now pregnant. I was completely overjoyed by the news, and to make matters better, we were back at war with Great Britain. We would have to travel back across the ferry point to join the fight, as we were in France during this time, visiting the in-laws. You know how it is. It wouldn't be long at all, though, before we began causing a bit of mischief to the local militia, just as well as completely outnumbering and dismantling British forces. Kill them all! Ah, yes, I live for the action and for the liberation of my nation. Now, you might think I had to put my honeymoon on pause, and that this might have been a little bit of a disturbance, this war and all. On the contrary, though, we thought of it more like an extension of the honeymoon. One particular battle in the hills of England was of interest. Our forces were completely outnumbered by Francis and Marigold's parties, but their peasant warriors wouldn't be able to take on the might of the French. I remember the smell of the rain and the mud before the adrenaline started pumping through my veins. We were on the move now, like a mighty bear hunting down a pack of deer. Even my wife, who was with child, was so brave and courageous during these battles, serving under our mighty banner. As the battle began, we were immediately winged by a rifle, but we had managed to take out one of their leaders. This is a trend that we would also attempt to continue as well. With two of their generals defeated, we very well might have a chance at winning this. Without the guidance of Arthur and James, their men were completely disorganized, making them nothing more than cannon fodder, and this battle nothing more than target practice for our soldiers. It was beginning to seem that victory was inevitable, although I will say at the end of the day, even without their leadership, enemy forces had fought quite well, and we barely ended up winning this battle by the skin of our teeth. But we did indeed win, thankfully. As you might imagine, my father-in-law was quite excited that we joined in on the battle there, rightfully so, because if we hadn't, he probably wouldn't be around to see the birth of his grandchildren. Speaking of which, we would assist him and Marie Anne and her army with tracking down some British forces in the area, though we did outnumber them 3-1, so it was hardly any concern. Nevertheless, any chance to impress our father-in-law as well as the King of France is one that we will take. Even if there might have been a little bit of friendly fire. He's probably fine. After that, we would split off from the army for a time and go off on our own, trying to hunt down any of the caravans of the British lords. Disrupting their supply lines would be absolutely crucial to winning this war. Now, we had traveled back to our homeland of Ireland to do this. While here, we would also encounter the remaining leaders of the Pembroke Rebellion that had happened last episode. The cocky bastard even tried rubbing it in my face as well. We'll fix his little wagon for him. Many a foolish rebel shall fall beneath their pitiful banner here today. Though the terrain won't make it easy, full of rivers and ponds, we would have to cross many a bridge. Could be quite dangerous as we have several muskets being fired at us. Nevertheless, I would charge the bridge over the mighty river without fear, firing at their soldiers first and foremost. After making my way through, I would begin charging them as well, focusing the bulk of my attention on their riflemen hiding out in the tree lines. And eventually, I would have the opportunity to take down the rebel leader himself. Now, with the rebel leaders defeated, we would take them prisoners so that we may take them back to Pembroke, where they could stand trial and justice can be served. We would travel back through England, where we would meet up with the party of our father-in-law, who was attempting to siege Penrith Castle once more. By this point, there's been so much bloodshed over this castle, I'm not sure it's worth it, but we'll come in to assist him. It is my hope, however, that with my assistance, the assistance of my men, and the French forces that are coming towards England, we may just be able able to keep this castle under French control. But first and foremost, we're going to have to scale these walls and take the damn thing once more. And God knows they're not going to make it easy on us, chasing these scared militiamen through their little wooden walls, using my mighty sword to defeat them. Easy peasy. Taking this castle had become like child's play to me by this point. They should really just surrender and hand it over next time. There wouldn't be so much bloodshed. After liberating the castle, we would stay with the army of our in-law and try to help him protect it from anyone who may try to besiege it. And believe me when I say there was many a poor fool who would dare try. Not that we minded, this was a great bonding time with my pregnant wife, and Sven, of course. We would also rummage through and loot any British villages that we came across looking for their nobles to hunt down. During such battles, I would let my men focus on the majority of the enemies while I hunted down their leaders. Subduing them was a huge benefit to the war, but of course, when we couldn't find them, we would also resort to taking out their caravans once more. Many of these caravans not only carried goods and whatnot that they would sell to local towns and thus giving the British leaders more money, but they would also carry weapons and ammo, which was a big problem for us. And thus, this is why it was so important for us to confiscate it. Now, back at Pembroke, I would decide to try my hand at a bit of smithing. I had a bit of a harebrained idea that if I could become a really good smith, maybe I could supply our own troops with their very own weapons from iron, silver, and other materials that we looted from the enemies, but I wasn't very good at it, as you can see. Only able to create a dull sword worth about 110 gold. But we'll keep practicing. However, at one point we would have to rush back to the city to stay for a while because my baby boy was finally born. My first true love in life, known as Bobby, which was a foolish name, so we were going to change it to Irish Jr., second of his name. Now, as you might imagine, with the birth of my son, I wanted to take some time to stay with my family, and of course my wife needed some time to recuperate before she went back on the war trail with me. This would also give me ample opportunity to organize and plan with my men, as well as take care of a few political issues from my lord's hall with the city, of course. But it wouldn't be long before we were back at it once more, hunting down British lords and leaders. Not to worry though, we hadn't brought our newborn with us, he was back at the city, he'll be fine. Eventually though, a few weeks later, we would come upon King Louis himself, who was doing the impossible. He was about to besiege London, the most well-equipped and well-defended city on this entire isle. It was basically a suicide mission, but by God, we weren't going to let him do it alone. It was also during this time that my wife became pregnant with child once more. Now I know what you're thinking, that's awful soon, but let me remind you it is the 1700s, and also the siege camp gets quite boring. But after a few more days of preparation, we were finally ready to attack. Winter was already upon us, and the icy, frozen cold had already set in long ago. The Brits had dug in deep into the city. The frozen night winds would play a somber song in our ears. Many a man shall meet his unjust end here tonight at this place. The body piles shall be stacked quite high, and tomorrow the undertaker shall earn his keep. So it begins. We would have to hit them full force right out the gate if we ever had any hope of taking this blasted city. As the army approached, the only thing between me and the enemy riflemen firing down upon me were these thin wooden barricades. But there were many a time they saved my life and even gave me the upper hand against those atop the walls. Finally, the army had arrived, pushing in the siege tower and the battering ram to knock down the city gates. As the men gathered in a large group under the moonlight trying to climb into the siege tower, I would begin offering cover fire against the enemy riflemen. But eventually, my wife and I would attempt to give reinforcements to those men atop the city walls. For every good general would die for his men, and on this night we would die 100 times over for hours if need be. After climbing to the top, at first things were going quite well, but then they began to look a bit more grim as the enemy reinforcements would arrive. My wife would take the western flank as I would take the east in an attempt to defend our men as they continued their glorious rampage. However, with time, slowly but surely, the odds were stacked further and further away from my favor. Eventually, I would fall, but my men would continue. As they would continue pushing, trying to break through the enemy enemy lines into the city, there was word and rumor that my father-in-law's army had come to reinforce us. With their arrival, the Brits would continue a retreat into the city, trying to dig in deeper and deeper. They would eventually make it into the inner parts of the city, into the keep where they would hide, but the outskirts were already captured, and we had indeed taken London under control of the French. Now, as the forces were in the keep hiding, the king himself would have to go in and clear them out, which he did as we were resting up from our injuries. A few days later, we were feeling much better. We would help try to clear out any enemy forces hiding in the area that were hoping to maybe try to snake London back from us. The Lady Susan in particular would try to test us on this day, a foolish move on her part. Positioning our men atop these snow-capped hills, she stood little to no chance against us. They would fire down at her forces as I would knock them from their horses with my mighty sword into the snow. The last few remaining resistance fighters of London went out not with a bang, but with a whimper. Instead of being executed, the fine lady would be taken prisoner and we'll take her back to London to serve trial. The same would happen for any of her companions that were scourging around the area doing the same. We didn't mind at all though, as their gear would fetch a fair price, and it was all for the glory of France and Ireland at the end of the day. Not only had we taken London, but we had also began to move our forces north, where we would encounter many a party such as Henry here. Once again though, as you might imagine, he stood little to no chance against us. Taking London was a massive milestone, but it was simply a first step. If all goes well before this war ends, we very well may own a good 75% or so of the entire kingdom. Or at least that was the plan overall, and that's why we would contribute our forces to the king's when we would attempt to take other castles such as Buckingham, where once again yet another mighty battle and slaughter shall await us here. But with any luck, perhaps many of our men shall survive to see another day. Sieging these castles was always a risky move, even though it was a top priority, because even though we outnumbered them 4 to 5-fold, until we get atop those walls and within those walls, we are always at the disadvantage here. Their positions high atop in the sky would always make us very vulnerable to their gunfire. Climbing the ladders during one of these battles would surely earn you plenty of glory, but it may also earn you a lead ball to the old skull, and also earn your wife a funeral shroud for you. Though plenty of veterans and generals alike had much to say about these battles, as did the grieving widows of these men. Many of these men were ecstatic to have survived the battle and to have taken this castle for their king and their country, but they were also devastated for the loss of their comrades. I tell you, my friends, for every single castle, city, and village that was bought through violence, the payment for each was a sea of blood. By this point in the war, we had taken a vast majority of the Kingdom of Great Britain, but we would continue pushing forward even as their forces dwindled. The war may end for France and the king may take whatever provinces, cities, and castles that he wants, but my job isn't done until I free my homeland. And no one would stand in my way. We will take Ireland back, even if it does fly under French colors, but that is a bridge that we'll have to cross when we get to it. Make no mistake, my friends, I don't want a French Ireland, I want an independent Ireland, liberated and free in all her glory. For now though, we'll need to continue playing our role as the king's ally, which at this moment will also include liberating London from its rebels who have taken back over. This was sure to happen as it is their capital city after all. Funny enough, my second son was born in the same area he was conceived in, a siege camp just outside the city of London. And for whatever strange reason, my wife continued trying to name our children Bobby, but I preferred the name Henry, which will be taken after his grandfather. A noble name from a noble man, one that will also get me a few brownie points with the old in-laws. After a few more days of preparation, we were finally ready to siege London once more. Not that I minded, but funny enough, I hadn't expected to be back here doing the exact same thing so soon. At least this time around it was during summer. Sure, it was quite a bit muddier and rainier, but at least we wouldn't have to fend off frostbite. We will, however, be fending off hordes upon hordes of rebels rebels though. It should be noted, however, that these rebels were much more clever than the previous garrison that was at this city 6 months ago when we liberated it and/or conquered it. It would seem that they've become quite clever with their tactics, and they've learned from the previous battle how to take us on, even destroying one of our siege towers. Our only hope of infiltrating the city would be a couple of ladders and, most importantly, our battering ram. As we were slamming the mighty city walls, I would do everything in my power to try and ensure that my men were not meeting an unfortunate fate. We would eventually break through the gates and through the rebel lines, making our way into the city square. We were having much success, and at first there were very little defenders within the city, but as I turned my head down the city streets came an entire horde of damn dirty rebels. My men and myself would make a last stand here today on these cobbled streets. Many, including myself, would fall in battle though, unfortunately. My father-in-law and his reinforcements were on their way, but they wouldn't arrive soon enough. Thankfully though, the remaining forces that were under my command would hold them off just long enough. My in-laws' men would manage to push the rebels further into the heart of the city, chasing them every step of the way. Finally, the flames of rebellion were extinguished once more, and London was once again under the control of the French. Even so, there were still a few minor gangs in the city who were loyal to the British Empire. After speaking with a gentleman by the name of Dogface Arthur, we would learn more about one of these said groups. Apparently this gang is led by a gentleman by the name of Harold Rottentooth, and they've been bothering some of the local shop owners. As an officer in the French military, I shall handle this rapscallion in the name of His Majesty. It's important to mention as well that Dogface Arthur here is also a gang leader himself, but he is loyal to us. Later into the night, he would allow my wife and I command over some of his men, and we were going to settle this little issue once and for all. We were sure to bring some of our own soldiers just in case some of these gang members got a wild hair. We would end up meeting the enemy gang in the city streets, and it was all about to go down. Saber in hand, I would begin cutting down these loyal dogs of the Brits. Truth be told, it was no big deal. We would slash and clash for about 30 to 45 minutes, and after it was all said and done, we of course were the victors. And just like that, with one fell swoop, the city streets of London were much more safe than they were before. Well, at least somewhat. Now, we hadn't planned on charging Dogface Arthur for our work here today since we had a common interest, but he ended up paying us anyhow, so that was cool. Now, to try and help out with the city morale, I thought it might be a great idea if I were to enter the tournament. I'm sure many of the locals would love to try to enter to try and take my head, but it would also be great if I were to crush them and let them know who the boss is, of course. However, many of the most interesting and most experienced contestants in the tournament were actually many of our Frenchmen themselves. At the very least though, we're putting on a pretty darn good show for the peasants of the city. Nearing the end of the tournament, I did notice that we had quite a few German soldiers that were in the tournament as well. They, of course, were hardly any match for us, and our resolve, especially during a competition of pistols. However, the main champion was a Britishman, and I only bring this up because I felt it was quite important for the citizens to see me kick his ass. Continuing with the good news of the day though, my wife was pregnant once more. I know, I couldn't tell you how I do it either though. It would seem I'm a champion all around. Using some of our winnings from these tournaments as well as the spoils of war, I decided back at Pembroke to discuss a purchasing of one of our fine establishments. This establishment and/or business is a silver smithy. These fine folks actually take silver ore and turn it into jewelry. As the lord of the city, and more importantly their new boss, I decided to enter this fine establishment and discuss some topics with the workers and make sure everything's going well and make sure they have the tools they need. Because if we take care of them, they'll take good care of our coin purse, and what I mean by that is as the owner of this establishment will get a good size cut of each sale they make. Now they do require silver ore in order to operate, something that we could actually find on many British caravans. So now, not only are we compromising their crucial supply chains, but we're also getting plenty of ore that we can actually use at our own business. Speaking of which, it would seem that the French have taken Tralee Castle over in Ireland, and the king has actually granted it to us. An awful kind gesture from him, perhaps one that was done in the hopes that once we conquer Ireland, I won't rise up against him or even try to take it for myself. itself? I suppose we'll have to see. As for now, we have much bigger fish to fry as we're all voting on whether or not we should actually make peace with Great Britain. Given the fact that this war has been raging on for quite some time, it is becoming quite expensive for us personally as well for everyone else, and the fact that we have a brand new castle in our homeland that we need to get the affairs in order for, I too would also vote in favor of peace with the British. For now. The best part about it is that they'll also be paying our empire tributes, which will also help counteract the effect of us having to pay tributes to Spain from the previous war with them. Perhaps our next war campaign should be a bit further south, if you know what I mean. Those damn payments to the Spanish are affecting our bottom line. But for now, we have other matters to attend to over at Tralee Castle. To think that we're finally back home after all this time, and not only are we back in our homeland, but we also have a place of our own. A castle, a kingdom on the rise. A foothold of light in the dark, desolate tunnel. A foothold to the complete conquering and liberation of our great Ireland. The end of our goal, the completion of our life's mission, is soon on the horizon. Yes, indeed, it won't be long now. Until next time, my friends.